Hello friends, welcome to Premier UPSC Ias. So let's continue with the remaining part of the modern history. Today we are going to complete the topic up till the independence of India. Okay, so let's move on. Three roundtable conferences. First roundtable conferences. Okay, first roundtable conference was held in London between November 1930 and January 1931. It was opened by King George V and chaired by Ramsay MacDonald. The Congress and some prominent business leaders had boycotted the first Roundtable Conference, but many other groups of Indians were represented at the conference. Indian princely states represented by Chancellor of the Chamber of Princess Maharaja of Patiala and other princes from the states attended it. Muslim League sent Aga Khan III, leader of the British Indian delegation, Muhammad Shafi, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, A.H. Ghaznavi, among others. Hindu Mahasabha was represented by B.S. Monje, M.R. Jayakar, and Diwan Bahadur Raja Narendranath. Sikhs were represented by Sardar Ujjal Singh and Sardar Sampuran Singh. Parsis were represented by Firoz Setna, Kowasji Jehangir, and Homi Modi attended. Women were represented by Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz and Radhabai Subbarayan. Liberals were represented by J. N. Basu, Tej Bahadur Sapru, C. Y. Chintamani, V. S. Srinivasa Sastri, and C. H. Setalwad. Different classes were represented by B. R. Ambedkar and Rattamalai Srinivasan. Justice Party was represented by Arkot Ramasamy Mudaliar, Bhaskar Rao, Vitoji Rao Jadhav, and Sir A. P. Patro. Labours were represented by N. M. Joshi and B. Shivarao. Indian Christians represented by K. T. Paul. Anglo-Indians represented by Henry Jidney. The government of India was represented by Narendranath, Bhupendranath Mitra, C. P. Ramaswamy Iyer, and M. Ramachandra Rao. There were also representatives of Europeans, landlords, universities of Burma, of Sindh, and some other provinces. Outcome of the first round table conference. Nothing much was achieved at the conference. It was generally agreed that India was to develop into a federation. There were two safeguards regarding defense and finance, while other departments were to be transferred. But little was done to implement these recommendations, and civil disobedience continued in India. The British realized that the participation of the Indian National Congress was necessary for any discussion for the future of the constitutional government in India. Second Roundtable Conference. The Second Roundtable Conference was held in London from September 7, 1931 to December 1, 1931. According to the agreement of Gandhi-Irwin Pact, Indian National Congress nominated Gandhi as its sole representative to attend Second Roundtable Conference. A. Rangaswamy Iyengar and Madan Mohan Malaviya were also there. Most of the other party representatives were more or less the same. Indian women had an additional representation in the form of Sarojini Naidu. At this time, Lord Irwin had been replaced by Lord Wellington as Viceroy in India. Just before the conference, the Labour government was also replaced in Britain by a coalition government. Conservatives in Britain, led by Churchill, strongly objected to the British government negotiating with Congress. At the conference, Gandhi claimed to represent all people of India against imperialism. However, other delegates did not share this view. Many of the delegates were conservative, government loyalists, and communalists, used by the government to neutralize the efforts of Gandhi. Since there was a participation of a large number of groups, the British government claimed that Congress did not represent the interests of all India. Gandhi demanded the immediate establishment of a responsible government at the center as well as in the provinces. He also reiterated that the Congress alone represented political India. On the subject of separate for electorate for depressed classes, Gandhi said they were Hindus and thus not to be treated as a minority. He also discarded the idea of a separate electorate for them. He also said there was no need for separate electorates or special safeguards for Muslims or other minorities. Others disagreed with Gandhi and the session got deadlocked. Muslims, depressed classes, Christians, and Anglo Indians came together in a minorities pact. The princes didn't want a federation. Just before the conference, the Labour government was also replaced. Outcome of the second roundtable conference. The session ended with MacDonald's announcement of the following: two Muslim majority provinces, Northwest Frontier Province and Sindh, setting up of Indian Consultative Committee, setting up of three expert committees for finance, franchise and states. The prospect of a unilateral British communal award if Indians failed to agree. Second phase of the civil disobedience movement. After the failure of the second roundtable conference, the Congress Working Committee decided on December 29, 1931, to resume the civil disobedience movement. This time, the British were determined to stop Gandhi from building up the tempo for a mass movement again. Viceroy Wellington refused a meeting with Gandhi on December 31. On January 4, 1932, Gandhi was arrested. A series of repressive ordinances were issued again, and a virtual martial law was brought in as civil martial law. Congress was banned at all levels and its leaders were arrested. Gandhi ashrams were occupied and properties were confiscated. Repression was hard on women too. Press was gagged and nationalist literature was banned. About 80,000 satyagrahis, mostly urban and rural poor, were jailed. This phase of the movement could not be sustained for long because Gandhi and other leaders had no time to build up the tempo and the masses were not prepared. In April 1934, Gandhi decided to withdraw the civil disobedience movement. Third Roundtable Conference. It was held between November 17, 1932 and December 24, 1932. Again, it was not attended by the Indian National Congress and most of the Indian leaders ignored it. Some of the representatives who attended all three roundtable conferences include Aga Khan III and B.R. Ambedkar, A.H. Ghaznavi and Henry Jidney, M.R. Jayakar and Kowasji Jahangir, N.M. Joshi, Arkot Ramasamy Mudaliar, Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz, Tej Bahadur Sapru. Outcome of the third roundtable conference. Little was achieved in this round conference too. The recommendations were published in a white paper in March 1933 and debated in British Parliament afterwards. A joint select committee was formed to produce a draft bill in February 1935, which was enforced as the Government of India Act of 1935 in July 1935. Communal Award. British PM of the time Ramsay MacDonald announced the Communal Award on August 16, 1932, based on the findings of the Indian Franchise Committee, also called the Lothian Committee. It provided for separate electorates for Muslims, Europeans, Sikhs, Indian, Christians, Anglo-Indians, depressed classes, women, and even to the Marathas for some seats in Bombay. The seats in the provincial legislatures were reserved on a communal basis. The depressed classes to be declared or accorded the status of minority and was to get double vote, one to be used through separate electorates and the other to be used in the general electorates. It was another step towards the British policy of divide and rule. Gandhi's response. Gandhi saw it as an attack on Indian unity and nationalism. According to him, once the depressed classes were treated as a separate political entity, he argued the question of abolishing untouchability would get undermined. He said that separate electorates would ensure that the untouchables remained untouchables. Gandhi demanded that the depressed classes be elected through joint and a wider electorate through the universal franchise. He, however, didn't object to a larger number of reserved seats. He went on an indefinite fast on September 20, 1932 to press his demands. Pune Pact. B.R. Ambedkar, M.C. Raja and Madan Mohan Malaviya got together to a compromise. This led to the Pune Pact. B.R. Ambedkar agreed to it on behalf of the depressed classes on September 24, 1932, thus abandoned the idea of separate electorates for the depressed classes. The seats reserved for the depressed classes were increased from 71 to 147 in provincial legislatures and 18% of the total in the central legislature. The Pune Pact was accepted by the government too. It amended the communal award. Gandhi's Harijan campaign. Gandhi wanted to counter the government's divide and rule policy. He gave up all his other preoccupations and launched a campaign against untouchability from jail. And that led the movement outside after his release. When in jail, he set up the All India Anti-Untouchability League in September 1932 and started the weekly Harijan in January 1933. After his release in August 1933, he had shifted to the Satyagraha ashram in Wardha. Since he had vowed in 1930 not to return to Sabarmati ashram unless Swaraj was won, he conducted a Harijan tour of the country, starting from Wardha in the period from November 1993 to July 1934, covering 20,000 kilometers. He collected money for his newly set up Harijan Sevak Sangh and advocated the removal of untouchability in all its forms. He undertook two fasts on May 8 and August 16, 1934 to convince his followers of the seriousness of his effort and the importance of the issue. Several orthodox elements held back flag demonstrations against him and accused him of attacking the Hinduism. They offered support to the government against the civil disobedience movement. The government returned the favor by defeating the Temple Entry Bill in August 1934. Debate on future strategy after the civil disobedience movement. The withdrawal of the civil disobedience movement opened up a debate on the future strategy of the nationalists on the following questions. What course the national movement should be taken in the immediate future? The question of office acceptance in the context of elections. There were three proposals such as constructive work on the Gandhian lines, constitutional struggle and participation in elections to the central legislature. The third proposal by a strong leftist team led by Nehru, who criticized the other proposals and favored the continuation of non-constitutionalist mass struggle. Because he believed that the situation was still revolutionary owing to the continued economic crisis and the readiness of the masses to fight. According to him, the discontinuation of the civil disobedience movement and council entry would be a spiritual defeat, a surrender of ideals, and a retreat from revolutionary to reformist mentality. He suggested taking up the economic and class demands of peasants and workers and landlords and capitalists and organizing masses in their class organizations such as Kisan Sabhas and trade unions. He called for the inclusion of these class organizations within the Congress, thus influencing its policies and activities. On the other question, Gandhi conciliated with the proponents of council entry by accepting their basic demand of permission to enter the legislatures. In 1934, the All India Congress Committee met at Patna to set up a parliamentary board to fight elections under the aegis of Congress. The trends in the Congress favored parliamentary politics, with which he was in fundamental disagreement. The socialists led by Nehru also had differences with Gandhi. Outcome of debate. Realizing that he was out of tune with Congress, in October 1934, Gandhi announced his resignation from the Congress. In the elections to the Central Legislative Assembly held in November 1934, the Congress captured 45 out of 75 seats reserved for Indians. Meanwhile, the Third Roundtable Conference led to the formulation of the Act of 1935, and it was passed by the British Parliament in August 1935. Government of India Act 1935. Provisions of the Government of India Act 1935. Federalism. It proposed an all India federation comprising of British Indian provinces, all chief commissioners, provinces, and princely states. The federation was conditioned on fulfillment of states with the allotment of 52 seats in a proposed Council of States should agree to join the federation. An aggregate population of states in the above category should be 50% of the total population of all Indian states. These conditions were not fulfilled and the proposed federation never came up. The central government carried on up to 1946 as per the provisions of Government of India Act 1919. Central level executive. Subjects were divided into reserve and transferred subjects. The reserve subjects included foreign affairs, defense, tribal areas, and ecclesiastical affairs. They were to be exclusively administered by the Governor General on the advice of executive councillors. The executive councillors were not to be responsible for the central legislature. The transferred subjects included all other subjects. They were to be administered by the Governor General on the advice of ministers elected by the legislature. These ministers were to be responsible to the federal legislature and were to resign on losing confidence of the body. Union legislature. It proposed a bicameral legislature with an upper house Council of States and a lower house Federal Assembly. Council of States was to be a 260-member house, partly directly elected from British Indian provinces and partly nominated 40% by the princes. The Federal Assembly was to be a 375-member house, partly indirectly elected from British Indian provinces and partly nominated one-third by the princes. The election to the Council of States was direct and that to the Federal Assembly indirect. Council of States was to be permanent body with one-third members retiring every third year. The duration of the assembly was to be 5 years. The three lists for legislation purposes were to be federal, provincial and concurrent. Members of the Federal Assembly could move a vote of no confidence against the ministers. Council of States could not move a vote of no confidence. 80% of the budget was non-votable and the Governor General was given residuary powers. He could restore cuts in grants, certify bills rejected by the legislature, issue ordinances and exercise his veto. Provincial legislature. Provincial autonomy was given and the diarchy at provinces was abolished. Governor was to be the Crown's nominee and representative to exercise authority on the King's behalf in a province. All members were to be directly elected. Governor was to have special powers regarding minorities, rights of civil servants, law and order, British business interests, partially excluded areas, princely states, etc. Adult franchise was extended women on the same basis as men. Ministers were to administer all provincial subjects in a council of ministers headed by a premier. Ministers were made answerable to and removable by the adverse vote of legislature. The provincial legislature could legislate on subjects in provincial and concurrent lists. Governor could refuse assent to a bill, promulgate ordinances, enact governors' acts. Response by the Indians. The 1935 Act was condemned and unanimously rejected by the Congress. The Congress demanded a constituent assembly elected on the basis of adult franchise to frame a constitution for independent India. The Hindu Mahasabha and the National Liberal Foundation supported the working of the 1935 Act in the central as well as the provincial level. The election to the provincial assemblies were announced in 1937 and once again the debate on the future strategy began. Though Congress opposed the 1935 Act, there was full agreement that the Congress should fight these elections on the basis of a detailed political and economic program. But what to do after elections was not clear whether to accept the office or reject. Debate on office acceptance. Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Bose, and Congress, Socialists and Communists were opposed to office acceptance and thereby in the working of the 1935 Act because they argued that it would negate the rejection of the Act. They also argued that it would take away the revolutionary character of the movement as constitutional work would sidetrack the main issues of freedom, economic and social justice, and removal of poverty. As a counter strategy, they proposed entry into the councils with an aim to create deadlocks, thus making the working of the act impossible. The proponents of the office acceptance opposed the 1935 Act, but they wanted to work a legislation since the option of a mass movement was not available at the time. They wanted that the administrative field should not be left open to pro-government reactionary forces. They argued that despite limited powers, provincial ministers could be used to promote constructive work. Gandhi initially opposed office acceptance but was willing to give a trial to the formation of Congress ministries. In the Lucknow session in early 1936 and Fazpur session in late 1937, Congress decided to fight elections and postpone the decision on office acceptance to the post-election phase. Congress rule. Elections of 1937. In February 1937, elections to the 11 provincial assemblies were held. An estimated 3 crore people, including over 40 lakh women, had been enfranchised, which was equivalent to 14% of the total population. Over 1.5 crore of these eligible voters, including nearly a million women, exercised their franchise according to reports. Congress released a manifesto which rejected the 1935 Act and promised the release of prisoners, removal of disabilities on the basis of gender and caste, and the radical transformation of the agrarian system, substantial reduction of rent and revenue, scaling down of rural debts, cheap credit, and right to form trade unions and to strike. Across the 11 provinces, Congress won 716 out of 1,161 seats in contested. It got a majority in all provinces except in Bengal, Assam, Punjab, Sindh, and the Northwest Front province. It emerged as the largest party in Bengal, Assam, and Northwest Frontier province. They formed the ministries in Bombay, Madras, Central Provinces, Odisha, United Provinces, Bihar, and later in the Northwest Frontier Province and Assam also. Gandhi advised the ministers to hold these offices lightly and not tightly. He asked them to see them as crowns of thorns and quicken the pace towards the nationalist goal. He also urged them to prove that Congress could rule with least assistance from the police and the army. Congress worked in provinces. Congress ruled for 28 months in the provinces and made some efforts made for people's welfare. Laws giving emergency powers were repealed and the press restrictions were lifted. Police powers were curbed and the CID stopped shadowing politicians. Political prisoners and revolutionaries were released and deportation and internment orders were revoked. There were constraints on the ministries, therefore could not undertake a complete overhaul of the agrarian structure by completely abolishing zamindari. In spite of these constraints, the Congress ministries managed to legislate a number of laws relating to land reforms, debt relief, forest grazing fee, arrears of rent, land tenures, etc. However, the benefits of these reforms mostly went to statutory and occupancy tenants, while subtenants did not gain much. Agricultural laborers couldn't benefit as much because they had not been mobilized. Congress tried to promote industrial peace by reducing strikes. They advocated compulsory arbitration prior to striking before they established conciliation machinery. They imposed a prohibition in certain areas and measures for the welfare of Harijans were taken. The temple entry use of public facilities were promoted. They were given scholarships and increase in their numbers in government service and police, etc. The encouragement was given to Khadi and other indigenous enterprises through subsidies and other measures. Efforts taken to develop planning through National Planning Committee set up under the Congress President Subhash Bose in 1938. Evaluation of the Congress rule. The Congress ministers were restricted by constraints and faced internal strife. Yet they were able to utilize the council work to their advantage to a great extent. They could convince people that self-government was necessary for radical social transformation. The ministries were able to control communal riots and utilized many erstwhile hostile elements. Their rule weakened the myth that Indians were not fit to rule. In the meanwhile, the Muslim League annoyed with Congress for not sharing power with them. Leaks allegations. The Muslim League formed Firpur Committee in 1938 to prepare a detailed report on the atrocities supposedly committed by the Congress ministries. They charged the Congress with interference in the religious rights, suppression of Urdu in favor of Hindi, denial of the proper representation, and of the oppression of Muslims in the economic sphere. The Congress realized that running the administration was not easy, and all sections of populations had such high expectations which could not be fulfilled all at once. They resigned in October 1939 after the outbreak of the Second World War. Moving forward, two important sessions of Congress. Haripura session of 1938. Subhash Chandra Bose was unanimously elected as the president for the Congress session at Haripura, Gujarat in February 1938. In this session, the Congress adopted a resolution that it would give moral support to those who were agitating against the exploitation in the princely states. Bose was also instrumental in setting up a national planning committee later that year. The international situation at the time was getting highly disturbed as there were clear signs that Europe was going to be embroiled in war. Tripura session of 1939. In January 1939, the Subhash Chandra Bose decided to stand again for the president's post of the Congress for Tripura session of the Congress. Gandhi didn't support Bose's candidature. Bose argued that he represented the new ideas, ideologies, problems, and programs that had come out of the progressive sharpening of the anti-imperialist struggle in India. However, it was various Congress bodies such as the Working Committee where ideologies and programs were developed. Moreover, the position of the Congress president was more of a constitutional one, representative and symbolic of the unity of the nation. Sardar Patel, Rajendra Prasad, and J.P. Kripalani and some other members of the Congress Working Committee favored the candidate supported by Gandhi, namely Pattabi Sitaramaiah, whereas Subhash Bose was supported by the Congress Socialist Party and the Communists. Bose won the election by 1580 votes against 1377. Gandhi congratulated Bose on his victory but also declared that Pattabi defeat is my defeat. The Congress session took place at Tripuri in the central provinces near present-day Jabalpur of Madhya Pradesh. Crisis at Tripuri. The working committee of the Congress was the ruling body of the Congress. It was not elected but nominated by the president. Bose's victory meant that nature of the leadership of the Congress would be polarized in terms of ideology and method of future struggle was clear. Bose, in his presidential speech, prophesied that imperialist war was about to take place in Europe and he wanted to submit the national demand of complete independence to the British government in the form of an ultimatum. If the ultimatum was rejected, a mass civil disobedience movement was to be launched. Bose advocated that advantage should be taken of the international crisis to strive for independence. Bose believed the masses were ready for the struggle. While Gandhi believed that it was not the time for such ultimatums, as neither the Congress nor the masses were yet ready for the struggle. There was communal discord in the country at the time, and Gandhi believed lack of unified vision would undermine the movement. Govind Ballabh Pant moved a resolution asking Bose to nominate the working committee in accordance with the wishes of Gandhiji, and the left was not keen on discarding Gandhi's leadership. Gandhi versus Bose. Gandhi didn't want to impose his will on the working committee on the issue of presidents. Bose refused to nominate a new working committee. Bose wanted to immediate struggle led by Gandhi, whereas Gandhi was firm in his belief that the time was not ripe for struggle. Gandhi and Bose were ideologically different. Both were unwilling to compromise on their ideas. Gandhi was firm that he would lead the Congress on the basis of his own strategy and style of politics or surrender the position of the leader. At this moment, even the socialists and the most of the communists was not keen on a split in the Congress. Everyone preferred a united Congress led by Gandhi as the national struggle was of utmost importance and the Congress was at the time the main organ of the struggle. Bose opted to resign from the president's post in April 1939. Rajendra Prasad was elected as the president of Congress. The crisis in the Congress was averted. Bose and his followers formed the Forward Bloc as a new party within the Congress at Makur Unnao. He gave a call for all India protests on July 9 against an AICC resolution. The Congress Working Committee took disciplinary action against Bose in August 1939 and debarred from holding any elective office in the Congress for a period of 3 years. He was removed from the post of president of the Bengal Provincial Congress. Awakening of the World War II. Nationalist response. Germany attacked Poland on 1st September 1939 that led to the Second World War. Britain declared war against Germany on September 3rd. British government of India declared India's support for the war without consulting Indian opinion. The Congress condemned the unilateral decision of drawing India into the war, but the Congress was opposed to fascism, Nazism, militarism as well. They offered to cooperate in the war but on two conditions. A constituent assembly should be convened to determine the political structure of a free India after the war. Some form of genuinely responsible government should be established at the center immediately. Linlithgow, the viceroy, rejected the offer. The Congress Working Committee session at Wardha was convened to discuss the Congress official position. Gandhi was sympathy for Britain in his war because of his total dislike of the fascist ideology, advocated the unconditional support to the Allied powers. Socialists such as the Subhash Bose, Acharya Narendra Dev, and Jayaprakash Narayan had no sympathy for either side in the war. They said that neither side should be supported by the nationalists. Instead, they advocated the launch a civil disobedience movement to take advantage of the situation and snatch freedom from Britain. Jawaharlal Nehru believed that justice was on the side of Britain, France, and Poland, but acknowledged that Britain and France were also imperialist powers. He advocated no Indian participation till India itself was free. At the same time, no advantage was to be taken of Britain's difficulties by starting an immediate civil disobedience movement. Wardha resolution of Congress Working Committee. Gandhi accepted the Nehru's position and Congress Working Committee adopted it and passed a resolution. It condemned the fascist aggression and said that India could not be a party to a war being fought for democratic freedom on the face of it, while that freedom was being denied to India. If asked if it asked if Britain was fighting for democracy and freedom, then it should be proved by ending imperialism in its colonies and establishing full democracy in India. It called upon the British government to declare its war aims soon and also as to how the principles of democracy were to be applied to India after the war. Government's response. The government's response was entirely negative. Linlithgow tried to use the Muslim League and princes against the Congress. In his statement, he refused to define British war aims beyond stating that Britain was resisting aggression. He said it would, as part of the future agreement, consult representatives of several communities, parties, and interests in India and the Indian princess as to how the Act of 1935 might be modified. He said it would immediately set up a consultative committee whose advice could be sought whenever required. Actually, he wanted the draconian powers by amending the 1935 Act. Defense of India Ordinance had been enforced the day the war was declared, aimed at restricting civil liberties. A top secret draft revolutionary movement ordinance had been prepared in May 1940, aimed at launching crippling preemptive strikes on the Congress. PM of the Britain at the time, Winston Churchill, and the Secretary of the State, Zetland, supported the reactionary policies of the British Indian government and branded the Congress as a Hindu organization. Nationalist response. Gandhi reacted sharply to the government's insensitivity to Indian public opinion. There is to be no democracy for India if Britain can prevent it. The Congress Working Committee, in its meeting on October 23, 1939, rejected the Viceroy's statement and decided not to support the war. It called upon Congress ministries to resign in the provinces. However, Gandhi and his supporters were not in favor of an immediate struggle. They instead advocated carrying out political work among the masses and negotiating until all possibilities of a negotiated settlement were exhausted. Linlithgow in January 1940 made a statement that Dominion status of Westminster variety after the war is the goal of British policy in India. At the Ramgarh session of the Congress in March 1940, under the presidency of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, rejected the statements. They again reiterated that India would accept nothing short of complete independence. The resolution of the session said that Indian freedom could not be in the form of a dominion and called for absolute sovereignty in the states and the provinces. At this point, everyone agreed that a battle must be waged. However, there was a disagreement over the form. They left the decision on the form and timing to Gandhi. Gandhi said that he would offer the British moral support during the war but on a non-violent basis. Subhash Bose continued to advocate his strong militant stand of direct action against the colonial governments. Muslim League passed a resolution at this time called the Pakistan Resolution at Lahore in March 1940. It called for grouping of geographically contiguous areas where Muslims are in majority, northwest and east, into independent states in which constituent units shall be autonomous and sovereign, and adequate safeguards to Muslims where they are in minority. August offer 1940. The early success of Hitler in the Second World War with the fall of Belgium put Britain in a conciliatory mood. The British Indian government came up with an offer to get the cooperation of India in the war. Linlithgow announced the so-called August offer in 1940. It proposed the following: dominion status has the objective for India, expansion of Viceroy's Executive Council which would have a majority of Indians, setting up of a constituent assembly after the war, no future constitution to be adopted without the consent of the minorities. The Congress rejected the August offer. Nehru said dominion status concept is as dead as a doornail. The Muslim League, however, welcomed the veto assurance given to it and reiterated the partition was its goal. Evaluation. August offer for the first time recognized the right of Indians to frame their own constitution, and Congress demand for a constituent assembly was conceded. Dominion status was explicitly offered for the first time. The Viceroy's Executive Council was enlarged in July 1941 and gave Indians a majority of 8 out of 12 members for the first time. However, the British remained in charge of defense, finance, and home. A National Defense Council was set up with purely advisory functions. British Indian government was adamant that no constitutional advance could be made till the Congress came to an agreement with the Muslim League. Quit India movement. Individual Satyagraha. After rejecting the August offer, the Congress once again asked Gandhi to take command towards the end of 1940. Gandhi began taking steps towards the preparation of a mass struggle. He initiated a concept of limited satyagraha on an individual basis by a few selected individuals in every locality. The aims of the individual satyagraha were to show that nationalist patience was not due to weakness, express people's feeling that they were not interested in the war and that there were no difference between Nazism and the double autocracy that ruled India. Give another opportunity to the government to accept the Congress demands. The Satyagrahi would demand freedom of speech against the war through an anti-war declaration. If the government did not arrest the Satyagrahi, then he or she would repeat it and move into villages and start a march towards Delhi. This movement, which came to be known as Delhi Chalo movement, Vinoba Bhave was the first to offer the individual satyagraha. Nehru was the second. 25,000 people had been convinced for individual civil disobedience by May 1941. Nehru, the successor of Gandhi. All the arrested Congress leaders were released in December 1941 as Japan was aggressively approaching India. The Congress Working Committee passed a resolution offering to cooperate with the government in the defense of India if full independence was given after the war and substance of power was transferred immediately. Gandhi designated Nehru as his chosen successor at this time. Following the Congress Working Committee resolution, a British government sent a mission to India in March 1942 headed by Sir Stafford Cripps with constitutional proposals to seek Indian support for the war. Stafford Cripps was left-wing Liberite who had actively supported the Indian national movement. In March 1942, Cripps' mission was sent because of the following reasons. The losses suffered by Britain in Southeast Asia. Japanese threat to invade India seemed real. Now Indian support became crucial. There was pressure on Britain from the allies USA, USSR, China to seek Indian cooperation. Indian nationalists had agreed to support the Allied cause if the substantial power was transferred immediately and complete independence given after the war. Proposals of Cripps mission. An Indian Union with a dominion status would be set up. A constituent assembly, partly elected and partly nominated, would be convened to frame a new constitution after the war. The British government would accept the new constitution with the following condition. Any province not willing to join the union could have a separate constitution and form a separate union. The new constitution making body and the British government would negotiate a treaty to effect the transfer of power and safeguard racial and religious minorities. In the meantime, defense of India would remain in British hands and the Governor General's powers would remain intact. Failure of the Cripps mission. The Cripps mission proposals failed to satisfy Indian nationalists. Different parties and groups had several objections to it. Nehru and Maulana Azad led the official negotiations for the Congress, and Congress put forth the following objections. Dominion status instead of a provision for complete independence, representation of the princely states by nominees and not by elected representatives, right to provinces to secede at this event as this went against the principle of national unity, absence of any plan for immediate transfer of power and absence of any real share in defense. The decision on secession was to be taken by a resolution in the legislature by a 60% majority. If less than 60% of members supported it, the decision was to be taken by a plebiscite of adult males of that province by a simple majority. Muslim League criticized the idea of a single Indian Union and did not like the machinery for the creation of a constituent assembly and a procedure to decide on the secession of provinces to the Union. They sought that the proposals denied the Muslims the right to self-determination and creation of Pakistan. The liberals considered the secession proposals to be against the unity and security of India. Gandhi described the scheme as a post-dated check.